The Philippines shimmered under the equatorial sun. For many servicemen, it was a fleeting Shangri-La. Pilots at Nichols Field, Luzon, like Major William Edwin Dias, whiled away the hours. They played poker and baseball. They enjoyed air-conditioned double features. They frequented lively bars like the Star Bar, the Chicago Bar, the Santa Ana Cabaret, and the Silver Dollar. Days drifted by with the quiet efficiency of Filipino houseboys. Lavandaras rustled past. Raven-haired Filipinas offered captivating smiles. This pervasive atmosphere, however, belied a dangerous illusion. It masked a critical military unpreparedness. Behind the tropical trade winds, America was critically unprepared. General Douglas MacArthur, commander of USFA, had rejected the long-standing War Plan Orange. He did this in late 1941. Instead, he stubbornly insisted on an aggressive defense. The Philippines was a vast archipelago. It had 7,107 islands. Its shoreline spread across nearly 100,000 square miles. MacArthur and Secretary of War Henry Stimson saw the Philippines as a strategic opportunity. They envisioned it as America's Singapore. This grand ambition triggered an 11th-hour military buildup. It was a desperate scramble. It rapidly outstripped all logistical capacity. The result was an epidemic of snafu and shortages. 22,000 U.S. Army Philippine Division troops were present. 10 Philippine Army Reserve Divisions were also there. However, the reserve divisions knew how to do little else but salute and line up for chow. Their equipment was largely obsolete. They had M1917A1 Doughboy helmets. They carried Springfield 1903 and Enfield rifles. They did not have a single tank. The Asiatic Fleet, the naval backbone, was a mere skeleton force. One observer called the USA military presence a little stick. It was a stick the United States carried while talking loudly in the Far East. This strategic miscalculation was compounded by dangerous overconfidence. It was widespread among USS, above them among US DTI, officers and pilots. Fueled by outdated perceptions, they genuinely believed Japanese pilots suffered from poor eyesight. They thought the Japanese flew shoddy planes. They believed Japanese ships and soldiers were inherently inferior. Many declared with certainty that Japan would never initiate a war. They were sure Japan would lose it within a few weeks. Were they prepared for the reality? They were tragically wrong. The War Department's Europe First strategy further relegated the Pacific theater to a low priority. Specifically, the Philippines became a low priority for reinforcements. Promises of a massive influx of modern aircraft had been made. These included 35 B-17 flying fortresses. That was 1/3 of the Army Air Force's bomber strength. 95 more B-17 and B-24 Liberators were promised. 195 Curtiss P-40B and P-40E Warhawk pursuit planes were on the list. 52 Douglas A-24 dive bombers were also expected, but the reality was stark. By November 1941, nearly 1 million tons of material were backlogged in US Battalion were backlogged in USI ports. This was due to a severe transport shortage. The first batch of unassembled P-40 planes arrived just days before the attack. They arrived on December 4th. They lacked essential fluids and ammunition. The Philippines was not a secure outpost. Its forces were critically ill-equipped. They were woefully unprepared for the scale of the impending conflict. Could anyone truly have been prepared? Diplomatic tensions had simmered for months. They finally boiled over. President Franklin D. Roosevelt had halted oil, iron, and rubber exports to Japan. He froze Japanese assets. He closed the Panama Canal. Japan, driven by its militaristic Hakko Ichiu ideology, viewed these as a declaration of war. The relaxed facade shattered on Saturday, December 6, 1941. At the Post Theatre at Nichols Field, Colonel Harold H. George delivered a chilling warning. He was Chief of Staff of the Far East Air Force's 5th Interceptor Command. He told his men they were not a suicide squadron yet, but he said they were damned close to it. He warned that war with Japan would come in a few days. It might even come in a matter of hours. The attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7th should have immediately galvanized U.S. forces in the Pacific. Word reached the Philippines on December 8th. At 02:30 hours, This plunged the USAF command into a blur of blunders. Poor decisions and bad luck plagued them. Major General Louis Brereton, FEA chief, repeatedly sought permission for a retaliatory raid. He asked MacArthur's chief of staff, Lieutenant General Richard Sutherland. Each time, he was denied. This led to a crippling hurry-up and wait syndrome among the pilots. Planes were ordered aloft bombless, then grounded. Their crews were left in agonizing limbo. Early warning signs were tragically missed. An SCR-270B radar unit at Iba Field had detected an unidentified plane over Luzon. It also detected additional blips throughout December 4th and 5th. These were met with delayed responses. MacArthur, despite the clear and present danger, had only ordered less than half of his precious B-17 planes south to Mindanao. This left many exposed. As the morning dragged on, the Japanese main strike force took off from Formosa. 108 twin-engine bombers and 84 Zeros comprised the 11th Air Fleet. They took off at 10:15. At 11:45, enemy planes were finally detected. Some P-40 planes were scrambled. At 12:20 hours, 2nd Lieutenant Sam Gracchio looked down at Clark Field. He was Dice's protégé. Flying at 10,000 feet, the air below, he remembered, was as smooth as glass. Just 10 minutes later, at 12:30 hours, the first wave descended. 53 Japanese Navy Type 96 and Type 1 bombers attacked. They were known as Nels and Bettys. The unpainted, gleaming metallic silver B-17 planes and unassembled P-40 planes sat exposed. They transformed into easy targets in a broiling holocaust. Bomb concussions rocked the very ground. Fuel trucks exploded in violent orange fireballs. Showers of sparks, shrapnel, and whipping propellers slashed through the air. Towering plumes of dark, oily smoke billowed skyward from the blazing inferno. Anti-aircraft gunners were largely ineffective. They were armed with 3-inch guns. Many had corroded World War I surplus ammunition duds. Amidst the chaos, Gracchio's squadron lost contact. He found himself in a frantic dogfight with a Zero. Its blood-red Hinomaru was a terrifying blur on its wings. He achieved his first victory. But the damage was done. The consequences were immediate and devastating. The Japanese air raid on Clark Field decimated U.S. air power. It was a significant turning point. It crippled American air defense. Devastating losses of aircraft and personnel shattered American illusions of invincibility. It revealed an immediate and terrifying vulnerability. The initial perceived Shangri-La had dissolved into a scene of utter destruction. This marked the true beginning of a prolonged, brutal war. It was characterized by organizational dysfunction. It also showed the insidious hurry-up and wait syndrome that had plagued them from the outset. It was a stark, cautionary tale of complacency. It was a story of underestimation of an adversary. It highlighted systemic logistical and leadership failures. This set the stage for unimaginable suffering. The prolonged and brutal defense of the Philippines became a crucible of human suffering. It was a stark testament to the immense cost of strategic neglect. It showed the cruel chasm between heroic rhetoric and the grim realities of the battlefield. Resources already scarce had been strategically misallocated. Bureaucratic failures crippled the fighting capacity of the Filipino-American forces. Crucial supplies were abandoned. Mountains of rice were left to rot. This was a bitter pill for the men. Their daily rations had dwindled to 1,000 calories. As the Japanese noose tightened, misleading messages from MacArthur's command echoed. They were designed to prolong resistance for strategic and political reasons. This fostered a profound sense of abandonment among the troops. Marine First Lieutenant Mike Dobovich admitted to his friend, First Lieutenant Jack Hawkins, that it looked bad. He said the Nips were pushing hard. He felt it would not be long. He believed the folks at home would send something out to them. He did not think they realized what the troops were going through. Hawkins felt like a lost sheep. He knew his men understood they were up against a stacked deck. The Germany First policy, solidified at the Arcadia Conference, had effectively doomed them. President Roosevelt publicly assured Filipino President Quezon of impending aid. But his fireside chats privately signaled a different truth. The Philippines was sacrificed. Quezon's anguished cry resonated with the troops. He said America writhed in anguish at the fate of a distant cousin, Europe. Meanwhile, a daughter, the Philippines, was being raped in the back room. Despite this crushing reality, the Phil-American forces fought with fierce tenacity. Battles like the Battle of the Points demonstrated their unwavering resourcefulness. The daring Subic Bay raid was another example. Legendary pilot Ed Dias and his squadron inflicted devastating damage on Japanese shipping there. They fought against overwhelming odds. These acts of valor, however, could not change the inevitable. As April loomed, the end was palpable. On Wednesday, April 8, amidst ear-splitting explosions, Chief Mechanic Leo Bolins scribbled in his diary. He wrote that they must stay and get out. It was a desperate prediction of the beginning of the end. The very air vibrated with the relentless Japanese push towards Mariveles. This effectively cut off Phil-American forces. It signaled the imminent collapse of defenses. The previous month, General Douglas MacArthur's evacuation from the Philippines had occurred. While strategically justified by some, it left a profound leadership void. It fueled cynicism among those left behind. Brigadier General Harold George, a steadfast presence, had told Dice something important. He said to tell the boys that if he was not back soon, it would not be because he did not want to come back. His words were a stark contrast to the distant, almost mythic image of MacArthur. Then came the death rattle of the peninsula. An earthquake on April 9th preceded the inevitable. In the face of utter futility, Major General Edward Postel King Jr. inherited command of Luzon Force. He made the agonizing decision to surrender the largest force in American military history. King stated that there was nothing left to do but to go and see General Grant. He drew a parallel to Robert E. Lee's surrender. He said he would rather die 1,000 deaths. Before the formal surrender, American stockpiles were detonated. This created a cacophony of ear-splitting explosions. A ghastly ruby glow of burning fuel tanks illuminated the sky. One officer likened the spectacle to a 4th of July display in its noise and color. The landscape transformed into a Dantesque scene of charred metal. King then met with Colonel Matonio Nakayama, Homer's senior operations officer. In a chillingly hollow pronouncement, Nakayama declared that the Imperial Japanese Army were not barbarians. The fall of Bataan and Corregidor marked a significant Japanese victory. It solidified their control over the Philippines. It profoundly demoralized Allied forces in the Pacific. Yet the defenders, despite their defeat, became national heroes. They were heroes for their resilience in the face of impossible odds. The myth of imminent reinforcements and a swift victory was tragically debunked. The troops had desperately clung to this hope. The Philippines had been strategically sacrificed due to the Europe First policy. For the battling bastards of Bataan, the abandonment was a wound as deep as any bullet. Captain Burt Bank lamented, "Where was America?" He felt America was abandoning them. He said they lived in the greatest country in the world, yet they were prisoners of the Japanese. Another officer simply stated that Bataan was one time the cavalry did not come over the hill to the rescue. With the surrender, the agony of organized resistance ended, but for the tens of thousands of American and Filipino soldiers, it marked only the beginning. It was the beginning of immense, unimaginable suffering. The surrender of Bataan did not end the fighting. It merely initiated a new, more profound agony. This was for the tens of thousands of American and Filipino soldiers. The subsequent march was a 65-mile crucible of torment. It was not solely an act of deliberate, pre-planned barbarity. Instead, it emerged from a catastrophic confluence of factors. These included Japanese strategic miscalculations and logistical breakdowns. Deep-seated cultural clashes and virulent ultranationalism also played a part. This ultranationalism viewed surrender as the ultimate disgrace. General Masaharu Homo, commander of the 14th Army, had conceived a humane evacuation plan. He did this on paper in March. He anticipated around 40,000 prisoners. He made provisions for medical aid stations. Yet, the fall of Bataan happened earlier than anticipated. The sheer, overwhelming number of actual prisoners was closer to 70,000. This shattered these fragile logistics. Homer's attention was already fixed on the invasion of Corregidor. He delegated the complex details of prisoner evacuation to subordinates. Crucially, his official orders for humane treatment often never filtered down. They did not reach the junior officers and foot soldiers on the ground. These soldiers were steeped in a military culture that glorified absolute victory. They scorned surrender. This breakdown was compounded by the insidious influence of ultranationalist figures. Colonel Masanobu Tuzi actively promoted brutality. He fostered a prevailing sentiment of retribution. These figures viewed POWs not as honorable combatants. They saw them as wrongdoers to be wiped out. The victory disease had taken root. It fostered a contempt for the defeated. This tragically overshadowed the emperor's decree for utmost kindness and benevolence. For Major Ed Dice, the illusion of an orderly surrender had shattered. It shattered even before his capture. He had watched in horror as enemy planes strafed unarmed troops. These troops waved makeshift surrender flags of bedsheets and towels. It was a chilling premonition of the savagery to come. His own capture near Little Baguio was a stark personal turning point. It was a sudden confrontation with enemy tanks. It made it clear the jig certainly was up. The casual, brutal execution of an American Air Corps captain occurred. He was killed for possessing a handful of Japanese currency. This horrifying event was witnessed by countless prisoners. It vividly underscored the illogical and arbitrary nature of Japanese military justice. It set a terrifying precedent for the days ahead. The march up the Serpentine East Road was just the beginning. The immediate, chaotic brutality of the forced march soon transitioned. It became the prolonged, systematic death sentence of Camp O'Donnell. The camp was designed to hold 9,000 men. Instead, it was crammed with 50,000. It transformed into an ever-expanding coop. It became a distended cesspool where disease and starvation were weaponized. The conditions were not merely harsh. They were a deliberate, slow-motion execution. The welcome speech from Commandant Captain Yoshio Tsuneyoshi extinguished any lingering hope. He declared they were not prisoners of war. He said they were sworn enemies of Japan. Therefore, they would not be treated like prisoners of honorable war. The camp became a ghastly vestibule to the hereafter. It was a place where the death rate peaked at 50 corpses every 24 hours. The Japanese guards openly declared that many Nippon died in Bataan. They would let just as many prisoners die there. The Bataan Death March and the subsequent horrors of Camp O'Donnell inflicted immense suffering and death. Thousands of Filipino and American prisoners perished. For survivors like Dice and his protégé, Sam Gracio, the experience left profound psychological trauma. It was a wound that would never fully heal. It debunked the myth of a war fought by honorable rules. It revealed instead a catastrophic misakaze, a monumental snafu. Initial, if inadequate, plans for humane treatment were utterly undermined. This was due to systemic failures. It was also due to a pervasive cultural disdain for surrender. And it was due to the active promotion of brutality on the ground. Was it an atrocity of deliberate design or a catastrophic failure? The legacy of the Bataan Death March endures as a searing symbol of wartime atrocity. It is a testament to the depths of human cruelty. It is a stark reminder of the immense human cost when strategic failures intertwine with virulent ideology. Cabanatuan Camp 1 was a fraternity of filth. It had its zero ward. It had a ceaseless procession of living skeletons. It was more than just a place of physical torment. It was a crucible designed to break the spirit. It aimed to effect a menticide, the death of the mind. The Japanese policy of deliberate starvation and neglect was pervasive. It involved a protein-poor menu. It included a primitive operating room that almost never was in operation. This systematically stripped men of their strength, dignity, and will. Yet, this systematic brutality forged something unbreakable within the survivors. They were the forgotten. They were sacrificed on the altar of a Germany-first strategy. This was a stark consequence of the US military's profound lack of preparedness. They were unprepared for the reality of POW survival. This vulnerability, both physical and psychological, amplified the horrors. It left men susceptible to insidious assaults on their reason and hope. The relentless Japanese propaganda was a drumbeat of lies. It spoke of a victorious imperial army and a crumbling America. It was designed to complete the mental subjugation, but a dawning, devastating realization truly isolated them. Their own countrymen might dismiss their future accounts as mere propaganda. This fear of disbelief challenged the implicit myth of American immunity to such suffering. It fueled a desperate, burning need to communicate their truth. They needed to ensure their suffering was understood and acknowledged. It solidified a craving not just for liberation. It was a craving for absolute, unequivocal victory. In this abyss of despair, moments of human connection became lifelines. Jack Hawkins found Mike Dobovich alive in the dysentery ward. They shared a single coconut. This was more than a reunion. It was an affirmation of shared humanity. It was a spark that ignited the quiet recounting of horrors. It bound them closer. Amidst the dehumanization, acts of defiance stubbornly emerged. Resilience and the relentless pursuit of freedom challenged the very core of Japanese control. Solidarity became the essential nutrient for survival. A nascent friendship formed between Captain Bert Bank and Major Ed Dias. It was forged over a shared piece of sugarcane. Dias showed quiet compassion in sharing a rare tin of sardines with a dying man. These were not men broken. These were men finding new strength in each other. Japanese tactics of intimidation were meant to crush all hope. The chilling shooting squad's directive made 9 men liable for the escape of 1. The brutal public execution of Lieutenant Colonels Biggs and Braytone and Lieutenant Gilbert also occurred. Instead, these served as a grim, visceral reminder of the stakes. They hardened resolve rather than shattering it. The sight of escapees forced to confess, yet appearing as fat as pigs, reinforced prisoner skepticism. It turned Japanese propaganda into a source of cynical humor and renewed resentment. Then came the transfer. A rumor bloomed into reality. Prisoners like Dobovich, Gracchio, and Bank boarded the Iri Maru. They soon discovered the vessel was dangerously laden with aviation gasoline. A flicker of hope ignited. The sweltering, poorly ventilated holds were a stark contrast to the fresh sea breezes on the upper deck. A meal of sardines, pork and beans, and condensed milk was a sheer luxury. It was a gift from the Japanese Navy crew. It offered a temporary reprieve. This unexpected, if fleeting, kindness, coupled with the ship's course south, rekindled desperate discussions of escape. They were headed towards Mindanao, a mere 600 miles from Allied territory. Dias, ever the leader, contemplated a mutiny. He recognized the numerical advantage of the POWs. Commander McCoy, a shrewd navigator, ultimately deemed the plan suicidal. This was given the ship's vulnerability. Yet, the very act of contemplating such a bold move, of sharing maps and discussing options, was powerful. It challenged the insidious myth that all prisoners were broken. It challenged the idea that they were devoid of hope and incapable of resistance. Could hope truly survive such conditions? The shared trauma and brutal realities endured within Cabanatuan forged an unbreakable bond. It instilled within them a deep-seated desire for retribution. This was not just for themselves, but for every man who had perished. They yearned for an absolute, unequivocal victory. This would finally bring their tormentors to justice. The journey aboard the Iri Maru, culminating in the distant coastline of Davao, laid crucial groundwork. It laid groundwork for future escape attempts. It transformed abstract dreams into concrete, meticulously planned actions. These were driven by an unyielding will to live, to fight, and to tell their story. The transfer to Davao Penal Colony, or Dapicol, marked a new phase. It was not a reprieve. It was a calculated new phase in Japan's brutal exploitation of Allied prisoners. General Hideki Tojo's directive was issued in July 1942. It stripped away any pretense of adherence to the Geneva Convention. He interpreted the rules, mutandis mutandis. This allowed the Japanese to disregard any provision conflicting with their imperial way. Tojo mandated that POW and technical skills be fully utilized. This was for the Greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere. Prisoners were to be kept under strict discipline. Their idleness was forbidden. They were forced to become cogs in the imperial war machine. Dapicol was a sprawling, self-sustaining city. It spanned 140 square miles. It was strategically isolated by a seemingly impenetrable swamp. This swamp teemed with giant insects, poisonous snakes, and crocodiles. The barracks housed 150 to 200 men. They offered a slight improvement over Cabanatuan with running water and latrines. However, they were still plagued by mosquitoes and rats. This minor alleviation in basic amenities came with an added burden. It was grueling forced labor in strategically vital areas. POWs were put to work exploiting the colony's resources. These included orchards bursting with fruit and fields of cassava, corn, and sugarcane. The most dangerous work was in the rice paddies. Men faced cobras and the insidious Schistosoma japonicum there. Logging operations involved felling mahogany behemoths for Maeda's profit. Crucially, a lifeline materialized from unexpected sources. These were Filipino civilian farmers known as colonos and even the convicts themselves. Candido Abrina, a charismatic agricultural advisor, became a vital reservoir of morale. He was affectionately known as Pop. He was also a key facilitator for the POWs. Abrina, a ham actor and born comic, leveraged his position and charm. He distracted guards with highly improbable and lascivious litanies of his romantic conquests in Davao. Meanwhile, prisoners gathered food. Unbeknownst to the Japanese, he also operated a shortwave radio. He tuned into U.S. broadcasts. He subtly conveyed crucial intelligence to the captive Americans. This included news of the Allied landings in Africa. His influence was such that guards called him their tomodachi or friend. Other Filipinos, like Feli Campo, dubbed the Florence Nightingale of Dapako, bravely smuggled medicine and clothing. They risked severe beatings. These acts of defiance culminated in children spontaneously singing "God Bless America." These acts deeply moved the prisoners. They demonstrated the enduring power of human connection and solidarity in the face of brutal occupation. Beneath the veneer of forced labor, a desperate need for self-preservation grew. Coupled with a moral imperative to expose Japanese atrocities, it fueled meticulous planning. It was the planning of a group escape. Rampant disease and constant abuse afflicted most prisoners. There was a protracted lobotomy of their spirit. This ignited a drive for action in a few. One steamy, sun-tortured afternoon, Melvin McCoy whispered to his friend Steve Melnick. They were in the thigh-high mud of the rice paddies. McCoy, exhausted and despairing, said they had to do something to get off this treadmill. Melnick, initially cautious, agreed they were marking time and getting nowhere. McCoy, his voice raw with frustration, blared his desire to escape. He wanted out. Melnick worried about starvation in the swamp or inevitable punishment, but they agreed on immediate steps. These involved finding food and mapping a path through the swamp. They acknowledged the critical need for shoes, leggings, and medicines like quinine. Small victories provided tangible proof of the prisoners' ability to outwit their captors. These included successful Operation Chicken raids on the Japanese poultry farm. The coffee farm scheme was another example. These audacious acts, while risky, built confidence. They gathered valuable resources. They served as critical training in stealth and planning. They proved it was risky, but not as risky as being too weak to actually escape. The Japanese believed the surrounding swamp made Dapakol escape-proof. They maintained lax security with only roving patrols and unsupervised labor details. This was a critical flaw. The prisoners were determined to exploit it. This ingenuity directly challenged the myth of Japanese invincibility. It challenged their perceived impermeability of the camp. It transformed the prisoners from passive victims into active agents of their own liberation. Could a swamp truly hold back the human spirit? A dramatic turning point arrived between January 29th and February 14th, 1943. Red Cross packages arrived. These cardboard cornucopias weighed 15 pounds each. They contained cans of corned beef, salmon, coffee, chocolate bars, and essential medical supplies. Prisoners, exactly like children on Christmas morning, tore open the boxes. Their hands trembled and their eyes sparkled. These were more than just rations. They were familiar symbols of home. They were tangible evidence that they were not forgotten. The packages dramatically improved morale and health. They transformed the prisoners' physical and psychological state. Bedridden men walked. Unsightly ulcers and rashes began to disappear. This flood of hope reignited the will to survive and escape. It solidified the belief that a world existed beyond the barbed wire. It was a world that desperately needed to hear their story. The cumulative effect of these factors led to a robust underground network. It was centered around the desire for escape and a sharing of vital resources. It led to the formation of a core escape group. This group was driven by a purpose beyond mere self-preservation. They wanted to tell the world what the Japanese were doing in the Philippines. They sought to influence history. They wanted to arouse the righteous fury of the American people for the punishment of Japan. This was another Bataan, they vowed. But this time, they intended to be on the winning team. The meticulous groundwork for the Dapacol escape was now firmly laid. It was a desperate gamble for freedom. The initial, tentative agreement between Schaffner and Dias had blossomed. It became a consolidated, audacious plan. It merged Dias's core group with Hawkins and Dobovich. This was a testament to inter-service trust. It was forged in the crucible of shared suffering. Commander McCoy, a man with a sharp, calculating mind, had insisted on expanding the party to 10. This decision was practical for mutual protection in the wild territory. It was also for the operation of the sailboat they hoped to commandeer, but it meant a painful closure of membership. Men like John Winterholler and Bert Bank had to be excluded. Their bodies were too ravaged by disease and starvation. It was a heart-wrenching choice. It was made for the group's overall security and operational feasibility. Even Sam Gruscio, whose own resolve burned with fierce intensity, had to make an agonizing decision. He left his fast friend, Mops Tonelli, behind. The stakes were too high. The risks to the entire endeavor were too great to compromise on physical fitness. The escape, however, relied on more than just American ingenuity. It hinged on the courage and local knowledge of Filipino collaborators. Benigno de la Cruz, a former hospital worker, had pharmacist's training. He also had a mastery of languages. He brought invaluable medical expertise. His best friend, Victorio Jumarong, was an illiterate but highly skilled woodsman. He provided crucial local knowledge. He had previously cleared the very trail through the swamp to Lungard. This was the path they now intended to use as their escape route. Their recruitment was a vital turning point. It offered a tangible path through the seemingly impenetrable jungle. As the planned departure date of March 28th loomed, the men gathered for a pre-escape briefing. McCoy's words were delivered with stark realism. They cut through any lingering illusions. They left the men with a sober understanding of the journey's brutal realities. He spoke of the possibility of abandonment. He spoke of the immense distance to Allied territory. He emphasized the absolute necessity of leaving no man behind if he could not keep pace. It was a grim, powerful address. It solidified their resolve. It underscored the profound, almost mythical prize that awaited them. That prize was freedom. It was a chance to live and a chance to fight again. Yet, even as the plan solidified, the capricious cruelty of their captors threatened everything. Unforeseen setbacks also threatened to unravel their efforts. A disciplinary onion incident occurred. It was a trivial infraction in the grand scheme of their suffering. It led to the temporary suspension of Dobovich and Hawkins from their crucial ploughing detail. This created a critical logistical challenge for transporting essential equipment. It was a problem that could have crippled the entire operation. It was Ed Dias, ever the daring pilot, who devised a high-stakes solution. He would transport a significant portion of the gear via bull cart. He would navigate the camp's patrols under the guise of an ordinary work detail. His lonesome mission was fraught with tension. It was a silent, nerve-wracking gamble that miraculously paid off. The constant, unpredictable danger was never far. Just days before the initial escape date, Lieutenant Hozumi launched a surprise inspection. His very presence exuded menace. It was a furious descent upon their barracks over contraband fruit. The terrifying near discovery of the quinine pills occurred. They were hidden in Schaffner's musette bag. It left the men numb with relief. It was a stark reminder of how close they were to utter ruin. Then came the crushing blow. The escape, planned for Sunday, March 28th, was dramatically postponed. Hozumi, in his arbitrary rage, ordered all hands to forfeit recreation. They had to work in the rice paddies as punishment for the fruit-picking incident. The news hit like a physical punch. It left the POWs reeling in disappointment. Ben de la Cruz, their Filipino ally, conveyed the grim message. He did so with a silent walk down the road. His unspoken warning echoed the dark cloud of uncertainty that now enveloped them. The week of delay that followed was a period of frightful strain. Each passing day was a torment of anxiety over their hidden supplies. Each guard's glance was a potential accusation. As the new escape date of April 4th approached, the urgency became palpable. News filtered through the camp. Dapakol's garrison was scheduled for reinforcement. That very week, increased guard presence would make an escape nearly impossible. The window of opportunity was slamming shut. Then, on a sultry afternoon, the camp was rocked by rifle shots near the hospital compound. Bullets buzzed through the air, narrowly missing prisoners. Sergeant John H. McPhee, an American POW, was shot and killed by a guard. His dying plea was, "My God, don't shoot me again." It was a brutal testament to the arbitrary violence that permeated their existence. Major Mader's subsequent pronouncement was delivered to the barracks leaders. He chillingly warned that any escape attempt would meet the same fate. The POWs, simmering with fury, vowed that those miserable, stinking bastards would pay for this someday. For men like Hawkins, the brutal act solidified their resolve. That night, as raindrops pattered on the tin roof of his barracks, he grappled with his fears. He thought of his fiancée. He considered the profound stakes of their attempt at freedom. His sleepless night was a crucible of introspection. It hardened his determination. Under this extreme duress, the escape plan was finalized. Desperate courage fueled their every move. They shared an understanding that this was their only chance for freedom. It was a chance to fight again. It was a chance to expose the awful true story of Japanese treatment of POWs. The alternative was a slow, agonizing death in Dapakol. They were no longer just prisoners. They were agents of truth. They were determined to survive and ensure that the world heard their story. The humid air of April 4th, 1943, hung heavy. It carried the unspoken tension of impending liberation or utter ruin. After weeks of meticulous planning, near disasters, and a nerve-wracking postponement, the moment had arrived. It was the moment for the Dapakol escape party. The Japanese, confident in the impenetrable swamp surrounding the colony, maintained lax security. This was a fatal miscalculation the prisoners were determined to exploit. This day, a Sunday, offered the perfect cover. Work details were less scrutinized. Recreation periods provided built-in excuses for movement. The plan, audacious in its simplicity, leveraged the very routines of their captivity. Dias, McCoy, Schofner, Hawkins, Dobovich, Melnick, Marshall, Spielman, Bolins, Braccio, Benigno de la Cruz, and Victorio Jumarong moved. They moved with a practiced nonchalance. Their hearts pounded beneath their worn uniforms. They slipped out through the main gate. They utilized the cover of their assigned work details. It was a move so unexpected the Japanese never conceived of it. The nerve-wracking tension was palpable. Each guard's glance was a potential death sentence. Schofner, ever vigilant, scanned for signs of cat-and-mouse traps. These were insidious Japanese ploys designed to ensnare escapees. But the guards, lulled by routine and the perceived security of the swamp, remained oblivious. Once clear of the immediate camp perimeter, the escapees plunged into the murky labyrinth of the jungle. It was a dense expanse of stagnant swamps, bamboo, and kogon. Victorio Jumarong, the illiterate but expert woodsman, became their indispensable guide. He led them along the very trail to Lungorg he had cleared before the war. The journey was a brutal test of endurance. It pushed men already weakened by months of starvation and disease to their absolute limits. They navigated a spongy, puddled jungle floor. They battled squadrons of mosquitoes and leeches. The constant threat of poisonous snakes and crocodiles lurked in the shadows. Each step was a battle against exhaustion. It was a battle against the maddening humidity. It was a battle against the ever-present fear of Japanese patrols. The quinine tablets, pilfered by Dias, became their shield against the malarial jungle. Filipino civilians, risking severe beatings, provided clandestine aid. They offered sustenance and crucial intelligence. Their quiet acts of defiance were a testament to their unwavering solidarity. The escapees relied on their ingenuity. They relied on their shared resolve. They relied on the crucial network of local resistance that had been painstakingly built. After days of grueling evasion, a new hope flickered on the horizon. The escapees were successfully picked up by American submarines. This marked a turning point. It brought not just physical freedom, but the profound relief of survival. It was the end of their long ordeal of captivity and evasion. It was the beginning of a new mission. To tell their story, Major William Edwin Dias, the charismatic pilot who had defied death countless times, returned to the United States. It was his 27th birthday, August 9th, 1943. His homecoming was shrouded in secrecy. It was a testament to the War Department's desire to control the narrative. He wired his wife, "Will arrive Chicago via United Airline 2:30 p.m., August 13 to remain 30 minutes. My presence in U.S. secret tell no one, not even folks." Under the dark cloak of secrecy, he arrived in Washington, D.C. He was an exhausted apparition in loose, ill-fitting khaki. His face, once vibrant, was now sunken and weathered. It was a bronzed mask, drained of its youthful vivacity. His muscles withered. His amber hair was thinning. But his crystalline, ice-blue eyes held a catalogue of countless soul-searing images. These were from months of captivity. Dias carried few possessions. A half-and-half tobacco tin served as a billfold. He had a creased mobile oil map of the Philippines. Rusty wings and captain's bars were also among his items. He carried a crucifix and medal of St. Christopher. These were given to him by a dying pilot. His debriefing was in the vast reinforced concrete bowels of the brand-new Pentagon building. It was arranged by General George V. Strong of the Military Intelligence Service. It was overseen by General Henry Hap Arnold. Dias articulated the horrors he endured with raw honesty. He said if any American could conjure the most diabolical of nightmares, they might come close. But none who had not gone through it could possibly have any idea of the tortures and horror. He spoke of what these men were going through. His testimony, dubbed the greatest story of the war in the Pacific, became the foundation for exposing the truth. It was more than a mere escape. It was a morality tale about pluck, luck, courage, camaraderie, ingenuity, and religious faith. It revealed the depth of brutality inflicted by one group of humans on another. The escape from DeVoe Penal Colony stands as the only successful American group escape. It was the only one from a Japanese camp in the Pacific War. It was a powerful rebuttal to the myth of inescapable Japanese captivity. It challenged the perceived invincibility of their forces. Was their invincibility truly a myth? The narrative brought long overdue attention to an overlooked story of the Pacific War. It solidified the escapees' legacy as symbols of resilience and truth-telling. It contributed significantly to the global understanding of wartime atrocities. They had not only escaped a brutal prison, they had also escaped oblivion. They ensured that the suffering of thousands would not be in vain. They ensured that the world would finally hear their awful true story.